Good evening, my Liberty.me friends. Welcome to Eye on the Empire. Now, normally, on a night like tonight, on Tuesday nights, I would be hanging out with a wonderful and articulate and unbelievably brilliant Scott Horton. But that is not going to happen tonight because Scott had some issue come up. And so we can't do the hangout tonight. But you know what they say in show business, the show must go on. You can't just cancel anything. So that's just the way it is. One of the reasons I admire people in show business, because they have to tend to their careers the way mothers tend to young children. There's always a mouth to feed, always a baby to wake, and so on. Anyway, I'm happy for the opportunity to visit with you tonight about this extremely important topic about the State of the Union, because tonight, it's a little like April 15th, except that it's purely intellectual sort of tax. The State of the Union is going to take over all public discussion. So it's all very strange. And it all starts in about an hour, where we get the great leader, whom very few of us voted for, and very few of us have any interest in. And his popularity is now at a deep low. It's something like 42% or something like that. Is going to embody the national will and tell us the direction we must move as people, and give us, out of his great mind, a vision for the future where the great collective called America is going to travel, so that we can achieve our, sort of destiny as a national entity, and so on and so on. And there's something, to my mind, that's deeply offensive about this entire project. Now, there's going to be plenty of things he says tonight that are going to be preposterous. We're probably going to get all the usual calls for oil independence from other nations, alternative energy, stop global warming or climate change through ending the Industrial Revolution, pay equity, and so on. He's going to take credit for Obamacare and be fast and loose with his figures about how many new insured people there are. And then he's going to tell a little story of a child who didn't have childcare or didn't have health care, who, thanks to him and his amazing benevolence with his astonishing legislative power, brought a new sense of hope and well-being to this young child, and everybody will cheer. And then he'll swear about the need to defeat all of America's enemies abroad, and so on it will go. And it'll all be very tedious and very maddening. Then there'll be a Republican response, and the Republican response will talk about how he's spending too much. He wants to spend too much money, how the promises of the past are not fulfilled, and how the economy is sluggish, and how the Republicans have the way forward, and so on. But will similarly adopt some of these sort of what I regard as anti-liberal presumptions of a nation unified, going in the same direction of history with a determined will, and so on. And I think that this is really the great intellectual conceit. And I wrote an article, I guess this time last year, which oddly I reread this morning and sent out on tweet. And actually I posted on Liberty.me, originally posted on Fee, and I kind of revived it. But about the intellectual apparatus of this idea of a president instructing the nation about where he and the government he heads is going to lead us. And I think that we need to take real issue with this. In many ways, there's a sort of pre-Enlightenment attitude. That's the idea of a single authority leading a people in an orderly way towards their destiny. It has nothing to do with liberalism that we discovered in the late Middle Ages and during the Enlightenment, where it was first perceived that, in fact, you don't have to have unity of purpose in a nation in order to have an orderly and prosperous commonwealth. It was the great discovery of modernity. It's the thing that gave rise to civilization as we know it. It ended disease. It brought universal human rights. It brought prosperity to the masses in a sense in which it had never been known from history. And what was that great insight? There was a great insight that that freedom is more valuable than authority in managing the world's affairs. It was an amazing discovery, and it happened in the late Middle Ages. The first step was to discover that it was possible that a society did not need a unitary religion, that you could have both Catholics and Protestants existing simultaneously. Actually, it predates that. If you go back to medieval Spain, the great discovery was that under a society ruled by Islam, the rights of Christians and Jews could be protected at almost an equal status to that of Muslims. And that the sharing of cultural insight from these various religions would give rise to something that was greater than any single religion offered on its own. And that was a beautiful insight. It transformed Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in the Middle Ages. It was the first great multicultural society of the modern world, or in the post-ancient civilization. And it laid out a template for the ever-increasing awareness that was sort of born in the 16th, 17th centuries, that freedom and liberty was the best way was the best political system. That people had made a mistake in the past in thinking that society had to be organized from the top down, that you needed a dictatorial single mind to lead people to a single direction in order to have progress, or in order to have order. It was discovered that the best means of progress was to have freedom in general, and that authority represented a hindrance to the achievement of prosperity and order. That's an amazing discovery. And yet here we are, and 1 hour from now, we will plunge back into the Dark Ages and into the ancient world, where the great leader is going to speak as a kind of omniscient, godlike figure, dictating to the rest of us about what we should do. Now, this is in complete contrast to the way the State of the Union, the way it started. It's a very ancient, not ancient, okay, nothing in America is ancient, but it's a very old institution, the State of the Union address. It dates back to really the founding period. And you can look at Thomas Jefferson's State of the Union and get a sense of what it was supposed to be. The idea, and I think it derives from the Constitution, is that the president should periodically report to the Congress on the status of the executive branch. That makes sense, right? The executive branch should be accountable to the legislature and indirectly to the people. So it was an annual sort of accounting, like here's how much I'm spending, here's what my bureaucrats are doing, here are the challenges we're facing. It was an intra-governmental kind of exercise. And in fact, Thomas Jefferson did it in the form of a letter. And that's just beautiful. So he wasn't addressing, the idea of the State of the Union was not to address the American people or to bring the nation together in some unified direction and inspire us with a sense of our collective duty. That was not the idea. The idea was a pure management report. It's the way it's what your business does. It's when the board gives a report to the stockholders, or where the CEO has to write up his report on his impressions of the management. It's just pure issues of institutional management. That's all it was. It didn't have these sort of Rousseauian overtones that we get today, that we're certainly going to hear tonight. And I can tell you, from my point of view, it's extremely creepy. And it's not just about Obama. I remember listening to Reagan's final State of the Union address, I guess it was 1987, and having a similar creeped out sense of, when they're talking about the city on the hill and where we were going as a people. It's offensive to the very idea of liberty, which, if it means anything, it means a radical diversity of plans, not unified plans. So there's just a couple of articles I wanted to kind of draw your attention to in order to sort of set the stage for what we're about to experience here. The first one I'm going to read my own, but the first one comes from Reason magazine, and it was Matt Welch, and it just came out a little bit ago. Typical with Reason magazine, they did a lot of great research into this whole thing, and so the article begins. Remember this Generation Sputnik moment? And there's a link. No, maybe that's because the moment vanished into thin air just seconds after President Barack Obama heralded its alleged existence in the 2011 State of the Union address. The idea is that we were going to go to Mars or something. That was one of his great things. Or perhaps you recall 2010's promise to, quote, double our exports over the next 5 years, an increase that will support 2 million jobs in America, unquote. This target was important enough that we received progress reports in 2011. Already our exports are up. In 2012, we're on track to meet the goal ahead of our schedule. The results on deadline day, 52% of the way there. State of the Union addresses are so jam-packed with worn-out rhetoric, stillborn initiatives, unacknowledged impotence, that those of us with a questionable habit of watching them year after year tend to fling ourselves with ample justification straight to the drinking game. But these emetic pageants also present a rare opportunity to hold the taxpayer's most powerful employee accountable for his misfired words, ideas, and deeds, a process that can throw off some important lessons about the limited utility and effectiveness of government power. So it's worth noting, while watching whatever stirring words may tumble forth tonight, that they are issuing from the same lips that said the following in 2010. Then he quotes a very funny line from Obama's 2010 address. Tonight, all of our men and women in uniform in Iraq and Afghanistan and around the world, they have to know that they have our respect, our gratitude, our full support. And just as they may have the resources they need in war, we all have a responsibility to support them when they come home. And that's why we made the largest increase in investments for veterans in decades last year. That's why we're building a 21st century Veterans Administration. By 2014, that 21st century VA was looking mighty 19th century, with appalling wait times for veterans, cover-ups by bureaucrats, and worse. It was no longer the go-to model for government-run healthcare. And yet the man ultimately responsible for that mess described the VA thusly in his State of the Union just a few months prior. We keep slashing that backlog so our veterans receive benefits they've earned, and our wounded warriors receive the health care, including the mental health care that they need. Or maybe government just doesn't know what the hell it's doing, including when it's doing very bad things. There'll be many nods at the president's legacy in this last turn at the lectern tonight, and there'll be no lack of journalistic examinations of what promises he has failed to keep. But I suspect when the dust of history clears a bit, Obama will be judged on the effects of his economic policies in the wake of the financial crisis. And while he was already trying to spike his particular football last year, a closer look at the man's own stated benchmarks for success illustrated something very close to the opposite. Here's what Barack Obama said in his 2010 State of the Union address. We can't afford another so-called economic expansion like the one of the last decade, what some call the lost decade, where jobs grew more slowly than any prior expansion, where the income of the average American household declined while the whole cost of healthcare, oh my God, and tuition reached record highs. Well, Obama presided over the slowest recovery since World War II. Middle household income has fallen. Tuition and healthcare costs have reached record highs. I don't need to tell you that. And the lost decade is around 15 years and counting. So keep that in mind as you listen to him tonight. Tonight, the president will say that the state of our economic union is strong, and we'll have some positive trend numbers to cite for that argument. And he will. You know, it's amazing what you can do with economic statistics. Choose your words carefully. You can make anything look like anything. But the lived-in reality of America, the consequences of bailout economics, continues to defy both the rosy depictions and the fatuous predictions of mere politicians. So that's what Matt Welch had to say. Let me just read you what I wrote last year. This is immediately following, and I think everything he's saying here applies, will apply again. Some people hated it. Some people loved it. Just about everyone seems to miss the real point. The most disturbing part of the annual State of the Union address by the U.S. president does not concern the specifics of the content or the policies, as wonderful or objectionable as they may be. The core problem is the very strange presumption that one man comprehends an entire nation and its meaning, embodies something like the guiding spirit of a people, and thereby earns the right to manage the entire collective from the top down through the judicious use of power. In a time of Leviathan, in which an incomprehensibly immense government aspires to master and administer every aspect of life itself, the notion that one powerful man, having processed all the relevant data and related causes and effects, can stand behind a podium and sum up the national spirit and agenda, the very State of the Union, plunges us into the realm of total fantasy. We flatter ourselves to believe that this is not an age of faith, but rather an age of reason. And the purpose and ethos of the State of the Union address are not reasonable. Maybe such a presumption of knowledge wouldn't be such a terribly offensive idea in the age of liberalism, where government had little to no power. If the government just had limited functioning, it would be more plausible for one person to report on the activities, not of the nation, but of the executive branch of the government itself. So if this were, for example, President Rutherford B. Hayes or Grover Cleveland speaking about their jobs, the State of the Union would not be as absurd. They ruled before the federal government could tax income, manage schools, regulate consumer products, arrest and jail people for their consumption choices, unleash a police state, or start wars without congressional approval. All before government consisted of hundreds of agencies, thousands of divisions staffed with millions of permanent and unaccountable lifetime employees, enforcing an accumulated cruft of 150 years of legislation. And, as a point of fact, every president from Thomas Jefferson through the 19th century delivered his State of the Union address in the form of a humble letter. It was not the State of the Union. It was an annual accounting by the president to Congress. It explained what the president was doing, more in the form of an annual employment review. The president was in the hot seat, and Congress was to be the judge. But this pattern was broken by Woodrow Wilson, the imperial president who gave us the income tax, the Fed, World War I. Wilson forged the template for the rest of history. He shocked Congress by delivering his address in person, with the beginnings of his modern ritual attendant upon the event. Thus was born the modern cult of the presidency, built under the leadership principle, and yet, even then, his address was largely limited to matters of state, what the government was doing and why. Wilson's imperium was over government, but not the nation as a whole. So his speech didn't even address how government would manage the whole of life itself. Then came Franklin Roosevelt and the centralized economic planning of the New Deal. Nothing was outside the purview of Washington. Once the United States entered World War II, the annual report to Congress became the State of the Union, as if the presidential mind was capable of extracting all relevant information, sea to shining sea, putting it in poetic words and presenting a vision for this giant collective and embodying the whole spirit of a people. Remember that this is the epic of the dictator, and every statesman in the world, in his heart of hearts, aspired to be that guy. It was also the beginning of the media age, so the message to Congress became a message to the entire country, attempting to somehow capture and characterize the whole of our lives. The advent of the modern State of the Union address in 1942 really amounted to a nationalization of the whole population. FDR said in his first State of the Union speech, implausibly, in the midst of mass death by conscription and material privation of war, "I'm proud to say to you that the spirit of the American people has never been higher than it is today." Can you imagine? 1942. Give me a break. The Union was never more closely knit together. This country was never more deeply determined to face the solemn tasks before it. I mean, just look at those words. Are we really being asked to believe that the American people as a whole have a single spirit, that the president is somehow magically ordained to know its height, that he knows all previous collective spirits in American history and can know for sure, based on his omniscient measuring skills, that it has never been higher? And can a country really be determined in the sense that it has a unified will, no different from an individual will, and it acts in history as an aggregate? There is nothing about this sense that embodies the idea of freedom. The American spirit, or the spirit of any people, is not a singular entity, but a social order in which millions and billions of individuals have rights and shape their own lives in cooperation with others based on their peaceful choices. Freedom is about an infinite diversity of changing plans, aspirations, and circumstances of time and place. It is also about a future that unfolds unpredictably in light of human choice, of learning, growing, trial and error, one life at a time. Freedom has no master at the top who knows what's best for everyone. There's a reason that despotism has long been associated with an all-knowing great leader. Of course, all good things that happen under the great leader's watch are due to him. Every healing, every new job, every new industry, every calming of every civil strife, every broken family that found its way, every lost soul that found salvation, all credit is due to him who rules, so knowing, so benevolent, so generous, and so loving. All of us live in waiting for the next miracle from the hand that feeds us and clothes us and educates us and makes us whole. Maybe you can say, oh, this posturing doesn't really matter. It's just political rhetoric. And that's true. But we should not be so dismissive about it. If this type of language were coming from a pompous local pastor or a bloviating business person at a Rotary luncheon, we'd be free to ignore it. But it's different when it comes from the head of state, with the power to do unthinkable things, whether we like it or not. Since the time of FDR, this speech has been designed to perpetuate an all-encompassing political program and also to marginalize the disgruntled and to treat dissidents like you and me, like non-persons, and to disregard and dismiss anyone who doesn't fall in line with its plans. This is why these speeches can so often make your skin crawl. There are fact checkers and commentators who oppose the specific points of the State of the Union, and of course there are plenty of bad policy ideas pushed through this venue, and those are easy to refute. Government cannot and does not create jobs. Government can't bring health and wealth to a country. Government can't make people smarter. It cannot cause incomes to rise by taxing some people more than transferring the proceeds to a bureaucracy. The best thing government can do is to get out of the way so that people can begin to build their own security and prosperity. But the specifics of the policies proposed in these addresses are not the worst part. The most objectionable aspect of the State of the Union is its epistemological conceit. The president has no access to the information he would need in order to know what he claims to know. He is a mere mortal who lives in real time, like the rest of us. He does not know the state of the union. The single hardest part of life as we know it is understanding the state of our own individual lives. Parents with teenagers know it's a full-time job just to keep up with what their own kids are doing. Owners of small businesses scramble every day just to know what is going on in their shops. Managers of medium-sized companies quickly discover that the only way forward is to trust others to know and manage as best they can. CEOs start their jobs with the presumption that their best hope for success is to outsource as much of the job as they can. And yet, with the US president, we're being asked to believe that this one man can know not just the whole of the affairs of state, but also the business of 316 million people. Know all of our hopes, frustrations, and aspirations, collect them into a big bundle and characterize them in total, and know the best possible means to get us from here to there. And in order to convince us of this ridiculous idea that he both knows the here and the there and everything that falls in between, the speeches have become increasingly personalized, constantly referring to archetypes within the social fabric. This is not an easy trick. The speech itself is produced not by magic fairies whispering truth into presidential ear, but rather through the much more mundane task of hiring professional ghostwriters who have heavy training in the political arts. It's a charade. Those close to power know this. They know the entire scene is artificial, designed to pump up power and influence it for its own sake. They figure, hey, it's dirty business, but somebody has to do it. And deep down, this is just cynicism, and all of it wrapped in a spectacle. We are right to fear for the souls of people involved in such a hoax. A real idealist would not hope for ever better ways of manufacturing myths through high-profile media events that disguise the true nature of government. A real idealist would hope for a world in which political leaders elicit massive public suspicion and opposition, not just when they're technically wrong on matters of policy, but also because they pretend to possess knowledge and competence that no mortal can possibly have. If a man is to do more harm than good in his efforts to improve the social order, wrote F.A. Hayek in his amazing essay, The Pretense of Knowledge, he will first need to recognize the insuperable limits of his knowledge. He will need to discover a lesson of humility, which should guard him against becoming an accomplice in men's fatal striving to control society, a striving which makes him not only a tyrant over his fellows, but which may well make him a destroyer of civilization, which no brain has designed, but which has grown from the free efforts of millions of individuals. But let's say that there absolutely must be a State of the Union address. What would a moral and honest speech say? Here's my proposal. It's your life. I am a person just like you, with no greater insight or wisdom than you, and no magical powers to create wealth or happiness. I can only get out of your way and wish you all the best as you, in cooperation with whomever you choose, make the most of this life, come what may. So I would love to hear those words tonight. I don't think we're going to. Well, thank you, my friends, for joining me on this hangout. The only thing I would slightly add to this is let's all remember that this is all theater. None of it has anything to do with reality. The government is increasingly irrelevant. The world order that's emerging in the digital age is much bigger, broader, more magnificent and complex than any human mind can comprehend, much less control. Things like the State of the Union, you know, the cries, the pleas of a dying institution. Let's watch. Let's revel. Let's see straight through it and look forward to a time when the whole world recognizes the great truth that society is not shaped by one will at the top, but by the billions and billions of individual decisions of the human beings that constitute the increasingly globalized social order. That's what matters. That's the data that will determine the future, not the will of one man. We can also be grateful to think that this is his last, although I dread what's coming, don't you? I mean, I think we all should. Anyway, all the best to you. I'm going to let you go, and I will probably be watching. I'm going to take my good friend David Vexler with me to a nice lounge, and we're going to turn on the TV and watch the State of the Union address. And he said, "Are you kidding me? I'm not going to watch. I'm going to sit down and write code during that hour." That's the right thing to do. Write code. Don't listen to this nonsense. All the best to you, my friends. Take care. Thank you for being a member of Liberty.me, and I will see you very soon indeed. And I and the Empire will be back next week, probably. All the best. Bye-bye.